that would be perfect.
I'm okay. Okay. We'll admit everybody. All right, we'll give everyone a moment to connect to audio. We have a good group here. Okay, good morning. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our interviewing day. To kick us off, we are extremely excited to have an alum here, Stephen Hull, who's going to talk a little bit more about interviewing in the healthcare consulting space. Stephen's had a lot of experience, and he's going to give us a presentation, and then we would invite you to submit any questions that you might have through the chat. And if we have some time, can get around to Q&A as well. So with that, I will hand it over to you, Stephen.
Fantastic. And sorry, Caroline, it's Stefan.
I apologize, Stefan.
No worries. And I'm a graduate of the Johns Hopkins School of Public Health from the time before it was called the Bloomberg School in the early 90s, when Hillary Clinton was organizing her healthcare proposals. It was a very exciting time to be in public health. I was at that time a journalist writing about health topics and food and drug law. And I later got into health economics and became a consultant at a company called Covance Health Economics. Following that, I worked at AdvaMed, which is a lobbying organization, advocacy organization for the medical device industry. And I started my firm in 2007. So we've been working for 15 years. I'll have a little bit of background on our function in the industry. Next slide, please. Okay, so just off the bat, what is healthcare consulting? Just a few words about that. It's almost a nebulous concept in that there are many, many different niches. In fact, I would say it's a cluster of niche specialty areas of expertise. Some of them are provider-oriented, health system-oriented, manufacturer-oriented, which is where we work, patient services, physician-oriented, payer-oriented, and so forth. The point of this is that your training at Johns Hopkins will probably give you a general survey understanding of many of these areas, but each of them will have niche specialized understanding and expertise that you'll have to develop further once you get there. In other words, it's a very, very specialized world, and it means very different things depending on which of these disciplines you pursue. Next slide, please. So focusing on our area in terms of products, we deal with medical devices, in vitro diagnostics, other forms of diagnostics, imaging systems, some specialty pharmaceuticals and biologics, though that is not the lion's share of our work. It's about 15% today. And what we do is we help product manufacturers anticipate and navigate the requirements of third-party payers, so insurance companies and public health systems, in order to secure coverage, coding, and payment. So in our landscape, coverage, coding, and payment are the building blocks of reimbursement, and they interact with each other separately. And I've listed below some of the concepts that come into play in this area of consulting that are pretty common. And there's a lot of communication work and strategic planning work as well. Some of these rely on more traditional disciplines like literature reviews and economic modeling. Others rely on more creative types of things like advocacy and strategic positioning, strategic navigation of health systems, things like that. Next slide, please. So just a quick word about our firm. We started originally focused on Europe and Japan. Those were our 6 original markets, EU5. Today, we're serving 22 markets. And of course, the US market is a key focus of ours. What we help the companies do is, in the early stages of development, anticipate the evidence needs that they'll need and the proper positioning of their product, and a little bit about price. Then we walk with them over the continuum of product development through the launch phase to help design dossiers for submission to achieve the different milestones they need for reimbursement. For device products, it's never a one-stop effort. It requires multiple steps and continued investment by the companies to prove the value of their product, to ensure proper utilization and so forth. Next slide, please. So in terms of the offerings that our firm develops, I mention this just because as you apply and interview with companies, it's important to understand in broad terms what it is they do. Strategic advisory services really comprises the lion's share today. More than half of our work has to do with advising companies on their study designs and so forth. We produce a lot of reports for companies. We'll look at 9 or 10 markets around the world simultaneously, or alternatively, it may just be a US project. We're looking at US strategy. We do health economic services where we develop models. So right now we have ongoing some modeling work in Brazil and in China to demonstrate product value. We pull together focus groups of physicians. Usually they are payer medical directors to try to give insight as to how payers will behave and perceive a product. We do a lot in execution and advocacy. We think that's really important. We don't think you can give advice unless you've actually done it. And then we help manage portfolios of products for clients over time. In some cases, one country, and in some cases, multiple countries. Next slide, please. So when we approach an interview process for a consultant and the management of existing consultants, we're looking for a number of skill sets. And also we reflect upon the key drivers of success once they're here at our company. So consulting, at least in our version of it, is really an area that's multidisciplinary. People who love variety and love challenge and love to continuously learn with every project. That's what's usually attractive. And those individuals tend to excel at it. In terms of deep diving and working continuously on a single project over the course of 3 months, we have some of that, but it tends to be less common. A consultant portfolio of projects in our company would typically involve at an associate level 5 to 6 projects at a time. And they would alternate between those different projects over the course of a week to make sure they're moving along and staying on schedule. So in terms of skill sets, analytics, of course, is key. Communications, written and verbal. Organizational skills and keeping a project organized. Number 4 is a tough one, strategic thinking, which tends to be experiential, but it's also something that we see early on. People either have this or they don't in terms of connecting the dots, in terms of what matters to a product, what are the critical success factors and how do you maximize them? And lastly, sort of speaking and presentation skills. How you present verbally is really critical in the consulting space. And that's something that shines through in the interview process for new candidates. So when we look back retrospectively at the consultants whom we've had, who have succeeded or not succeeded, and this, by the way, spans a broad range of disciplines. We've had physicians, attorneys, JDs, MBAs, PhDs, bioengineers who have filled over the years, the various positions we have at associate and senior associate levels. Core analytic and writing skills is number 1. Those individuals who are strong writers tended to do well for the most part. And those who weren't, regardless of their degree, tended not to. Positive attitude, commitment, and work ethic, really, really critical. So commitment is key. And part and parcel with commitment is an understanding of the environment that you're signing up for. The remainder of the issues or the factors are important, but they are perhaps less drivers of success. Ability and interest to learn continuously, so curiosity that I mentioned before. If you don't bother to master the dynamics and issues around a new client product, you'll never really excel at giving them strategic advice. So it's important to have that interest to understand their disease area and why their solution matters. Organizational skills and timeliness. Timelines are important in the business world. And so we want people who keep an eye on that. Client-facing skills, not everyone has them, but the ability to develop these and to be able to present to clients, to listen well. It's actually mostly a listening skill issue. And then being thoughtful and concise in your responses, those are important. And then lastly, collaboration and respect for partners, colleagues, and clients. So we always say that respect for local knowledge is key. We work with overseas consultants who have exclusive contracts with us in all of these markets. We respect their local knowledge. That's why they're on the team. And on occasion, we will challenge them, but it doesn't mean we don't respect their judgment. And we need to treat them well so that they have an interest to continue working with us. And the same, of course, with clients and colleagues. Next slide, please. This is an example of an actual job posting on LinkedIn. In a hiring process we went through in November that produced about 250 resumes. And this corresponded to 4 positions that we had open. We still have 1 of those positions open, but we filled 3 of them. It is not the best job posting we've ever posted, but if you read it, there should be one thing that shines through very, very clearly, which unfortunately we repeat over and over again: editing and writing skills. So what we're looking for when people respond to an ad like this is strong evidence of their writing. Things that they've done beyond just their normal academic workload that have to do with publications, journal articles that they've published, examples of the skill of editing and writing where they've really shined and have been recognized. A senior associate posting, this is an associate level, would also have more client-facing emphasis. So managing projects, interacting with customers, that sort of thing. And then the details of the position are below. As a firm, we try to stay competitive with the largest companies in the business. So we have a package we think is pretty strong. We offer 3 weeks of vacation, 15% bonus potential, and all of the other types of things that are offered in the industry. Next slide, please. So out of 250 applicants in this recent cycle, here's a breakdown of how they fell from our eyes. I wish I could say that we spent 30 minutes on each resume, but the reality is in the first pass in the door, that is not true at our firm, and it's probably not true in any firm in the industry. It's about a 30-minute review, 30-second review by 2 different reviewers. We skim through very quickly. First, we check off geographic location. In the case of our company, because our offices are in the Boston area, we want to see some connection with this area geographically. If they don't live here, that they've lived here in the past or have some connection. We have not, in this hiring round, because we had so many applicants, considered anyone from California, just because of the relocation challenges with that. That's just a practical constraint. So it's not a must-have, but a nice-to-have. So if you were coming from Baltimore, we would want to see that you've had some experience in Boston. The honest truth is our weather up here is not great, and it's not for everyone. So we want to make sure that the relocation works. Exposure to healthcare is key. We have a lot of applicants coming from the financial sector, the legal world, but who don't have any exposure to healthcare. Our supposition is it's a little bit difficult to understand everything we do, plus learning the ABCs of healthcare at the same time. Demonstrated writing experience, which I mentioned, internships or professional roles that demonstrate skills. So if you've done prior work in a consulting company, were you just answering a hotline with a script, or were you having to actually think on your feet and apply original analysis to the work you were doing? We do a lot of that. It's a very demanding role in that sense. It's not a repetitive task type of role. Each project is customized. So we need people to really think through what they're doing and the value they're providing. We really like to see signs of determination, work ethic, and accomplishment. And in the overall picture of the candidate, did they have to really strive hard to achieve what they've achieved? And so it means something to us if someone took an extra course load of 5 courses instead of 4 per semester, or were they working 2 jobs alongside their academic program? Or were they going out and trying to maximize their experience by the time they graduated? Those are the types of things we like to see. We do like to see high performance in the academic context, but I'll tell you, the GPA of a person is less vital to us in the sense that anyone that is at a 3.5 or higher is probably going to be quite suitable from an elite school like Johns Hopkins. If someone has a 2.5, I admit that's not terribly impressive, but so I guess what I'm describing here is it's something we look at, but it's not the first criteria for selection. Lastly, in the interview process, I'm really keen to see people who have had customer service jobs, including waiting tables at restaurants. Can you interact with difficult customers, hear what they need, and deliver satisfaction? That's what we do. We're a services group. So in terms of breakdown of applicants, about 10% of this 250 were what we considered to be top tier candidates. They had some depth of experience. They had proved themselves in management roles or internship roles. They seemed to have very strong writing, or they had a background that implied strong writing. The next bucket are what I call B+ candidates. They were good, but there were some things about their background that were not ideal. All of them in the B+ category would have had some healthcare exposure, but not necessarily the writing, for example. And then the average bucket, there's a long, long line of candidates who come in the door, and you get the sense that they're just randomly applying to a job among 300 others to see what will stick. We don't really spend much time on those at all. And then the last 20%, we considered, maybe they're good, but they live in Hawaii. They've never been to Boston before. We're not going to be able to spend time on them, or they have none of the qualifications for seeking. So this is the first pass, the first cut of the resume review process. Next slide, please. So our interview process has 5 steps. An initial interview with me, then a follow-up interview with my colleague, a senior director of market access at our firm. We ask similar questions, but not exactly the same approach. Then we have an in-person meeting and a skills test, either in person or remote, that takes 3 hours, and it's a written test. It's not a scenario type of test. It's mostly a writing exercise. And then a set of reference checks. In prior cycles, this whole thing has taken 3 to 4 weeks. In recent years, and for example, in November, we found that was much too long because of the speed of the market. So we tried to accelerate this to something much faster. Next slide, please. And here is a snapshot of the attrition of those candidates selected for interviews, roughly, in how it went. About 30% of them we rejected after the initial interview. Really important. And I suppose the most prescient topic for today, how people presented, their extent of being prepared. They were riding in a car at the scheduled time of the interview. They couldn't remember who the firm was or why we were calling them. All sorts of things would cause us not to even follow up after the first interview. The follow-up colleague interview, another 15% were probably rejected, partly because some of the candidates gave completely different answers when they spoke with my colleague, or they asked things because he's not the president of the company that probably they wanted to ask but didn't ask me, like, how soon can I go to a full remote function in your company? Something that is a bit of a red flag for us, and I'll explain that later. At the in-person meeting stage, at that point where we've spoken with the person twice, there is still a portion that we reject just based on the way they handle the in-person meeting and how they present, how they're dressed for the interview, whether we feel that they are a good fit with the dynamics of the team, their interpersonal skills. The skills test, about another 30% would drop out, mostly because they don't have the writing skills. And it's really, really hard when you get to that point and the candidate just doesn't have what you're looking for from an editing and writing perspective, but it certainly happened in this round. We had a couple of candidates. I was really excited to make them an offer, but when I looked at their editing and writing sample, it was just not sufficient. At the reference stage, I can't think of anyone who's ever been rejected because their references were weak, but I will say strong references really help give us confidence. And what we want here, all of the people whom we ultimately selected had rave reviews from the interviewees, the references. They said, this person is a superstar. They really work hard. They spend every minute trying to master what's in front of them, and they go above and beyond. That's exactly what we want to hear for a consulting role. So at the end of the day, about 15% of the selected candidates receive offers. So that's 15% of 10%. And of those, about a quarter of them were not able to agree on salary. And it's usually at that stage a little bit surprising, but I'll say a word about that as well. Negotiation for salary is a tricky thing. And in this environment, you probably are aware that there's a lot of inflation of salaries, particularly in our space for people who have 2 years of experience. There's a feeding frenzy to hire away people who have a couple of years of experience and have established the basics. And that's because in our discipline, it takes a lot of time and effort to train someone out, at least a year. And remember, in our context, we're learning about 5 or 6 different payment pathways, payment systems in the United States. And we're also learning about payment systems all over the world. So there's a constant infusion of knowledge into our new candidates who arrive on board. So the training is a steep curve. If somebody has been out in the workforce and they've proven themselves as a manager, we definitely recognize that in our compensation package. But if all they have under their belt are a series of internships, that is not the same as actual work experience. It's close, it's good, but it's not going to get it done in terms of justifying the salary at a level of a 2-year consultant. And I recommend looking at Glassdoor.com and comparing similar positions at other firms. And we have no problem going head to head against some of the largest companies in the industry if you look at comparable years of experience. And you'll find that our compensation is right on par with what they do. The other thing I noticed on the salary negotiation is that candidates are very, very focused on base salary and less so on bonus. I had one candidate, the total package, he pointed me to a Glassdoor profile that he thought was a good benchmark for him. He was looking at candidates with 4 years of experience. And that was because this individual is a pharmacist. He had had a 4-year internship as part of his pharmacy degree. So he thought that meant 4 years of work experience, which I disagreed with. But when I looked at the total compensation, we were actually offering exactly the same amount. It's just that more of what we were offering up front was in the form of bonus. There are many reasons why employers cannot offer an extremely high base salary to start. And one of them is equity. It is not possible for me to give one person 140% of what someone else is earning just because they think they deserve it. That creates problems within the team, exposure for the company. At the end of the day, we look for people who are willing to earn their spot and willing to work their way up. The compensation this one individual wanted was certainly within reach of someone who had proven themselves and within 12 months would have achieved it easily. But at the end of the day, we said, this person will be dissatisfied from the day they arrive if they don't get this salary. And they seem to feel entitled to getting a certain level of salary because they've done these internships. That doesn't feel like it's a great fit for us. So that was a reason this person didn't ultimately get an offer. Next slide, please. Ethics, integrity, and veracity. Really important. I posted an image here of an individual you've probably read about. A huge scandal in the industry in the in vitro diagnostic space. And I just have to say that where we do business, it includes geographies such as Russia, Brazil, China, and India, where common business practices have involved in the past things that would be violative of US law. There's an American statute called the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. We have to train all of our people in it. And at every level of detail, we have to make sure that our work is conveying the truth and is accurate. And that includes the veracity of our local consultants overseas. If they are fudging things in terms of their research, it's not going to work for us. So we need people who are very transparent and upfront. And so in that 2-person interview process, if people say something different to my deputy than they told me, that's a red flag for us. So we watch that really, really carefully in our interview process. And I would say the biggest mistake, remember that there's 30% attrition in the first interview. The biggest mistake that people make is trying to fudge their knowledge about our specialty area. What we're looking for in that first interview is that people have taken the time to look at our website to try to understand what we do, which is great. And it's a red flag if they haven't, frankly, if they haven't bothered to do that, but not for them to convey some expertise of what we do. And some of the individuals we interview try to come across as if they're mini experts in market access and reimbursement. And of course, they get a lot of the details completely wrong. That's a bit of a red flag. They're trying to fudge their way through an interview and pretend that they know something that they don't. Well, that's not consulting. And clients will see through that right away. So you want to come across as being truthful and accurate. And it's perfectly okay to say, I don't really understand your discipline and reimbursement, but I did look up your website and I read these other things about it. And here are the things about it that struck me as really interesting. That's a great answer in the interview process and a very truthful one and one that we would respect, as opposed to the individual that starts trying to ramble on about Medicare and Medicaid and confuses the two concepts. That's a bad move. So in all things, try to tell the truth. I tell my team every day, we're fortunate in that we get paid explicitly to tell the truth. That's our job. Focus on your strengths. Do not try to aggrandize what you've done or make it seem bigger than what it really is. I had an individual some time ago who applied, and at the age of 18, when he was a freshman in college, he was purporting to have managed a team of 12 people at an EMT locally. It didn't seem quite credible. Don't try to convey knowledge that you don't have. Don't try to be an expert in our field, but do focus on asking good questions. And don't try to sort of convey a management role if you are actually an intern and you are walking around an office just moving paper. Try to present your work in proportion to what it was. We'll respect you much more for conveying that honestly. Next slide, please. So key observations on this recent process. What we're looking for foremost is evidence of effort, attention, and interest. Effort to understand the company, to look at our website, enthusiasm and commitment. Ultimately, it's about that. More so than your degree, to be honest. Is this someone who's really going to hustle and will work hard to learn our area and be committed to gaining mastery? So preparing for the interview is key. An hour or two would be sufficient, honestly. I'm not speaking about a day. Asking informed questions, being a good listener in the interview process. A few candidates, their challenge in responding to your questions is being focused and concise. A couple of interviewees, I remember, I would ask a question and then they would spend 15 minutes speaking, and they would cover all kinds of things that had nothing to do with my question. Not really a good approach. And that implied to me that in front of a customer, they would do the same thing. That's often, in the customer's eyes, a sign of inexperience. And the signal to us is it would be a long time before this person could ever be client-facing. So get to the point. Competence is a good thing, but arrogance is not. If there happens to be an area where you have accomplished something, it's fine to convey that, absolutely great, but try not to aggrandize it and try not to pretend that you're the only person with that skill set. I'm reminded of a meeting I had many years ago in Germany, and this had to do with COPD, lung volume reduction surgery. And I was sitting next to one of the strongest clinical experts in Europe. He was a German professor, had done hundreds of surgeries and was a pioneer on technique. And I was asking him about a brand new therapy that was evolving. And I said, I'm not a clinician, doctor, but when I look at this, I'm curious about how it works. And he looked at me, he said, we really don't understand how it works or why it works. So this is one of the brightest people in his field, completely unafraid to tell me that there was something he didn't understand. That's a normal thing. And it's something that people will respect in the interview process. You shouldn't be afraid to say that there's something you don't understand. What is important is that you know that there are questions to ask and there is knowledge to ascertain to master it. Next bullet on this list, no, working remotely is not really a career objective. If I have a candidate on the deck and the first thing they ask me is about opportunities to work remotely, it is a sign that it's probably not going to work out. We are a bit old-fashioned in that sense. We have a complex business area. And the only way we know to teach it is by working side by side intensively with our new consultants in working through the client problems and training as we go. They can gain mastery in 6 months to a year. For accomplished consultants who have been doing this for a couple of years and have demonstrated discipline with deadlines and so forth, we of course have had remote arrangements. We are all remote during COVID. My observation during the COVID period was our brand new hires really struggled to actually learn and master this. And as a result, they never really got the strong foundation they needed in that first year. Next bullet I mentioned already, internships are great, but don't pretend that they're the same as a paid full-time position. It's just a different experience. And then when it comes to salary, be strategic. Consider the value of the entire package. Be willing to give up bonus if you're seeking a higher salary. In other words, if your objective is higher salary, be willing to propose that. There may be situations where the employer can budge and others where they can't. Realize that on your first day in a specialty consulting niche, it is quite possible you'll know nothing about the core subject or very little. So in our discipline, reimbursement systems and Medicare and Medicaid, I remember one course, actually 2 classes of one course that covered this topic when I was at Hopkins years ago. So it's more of just an introductory level discussion that you may have at a graduate school level. If you focused on this as part of your PhD, sort of health economics and reimbursement, you may have much greater depth. The point of this, though, is that your employer is going to have to spend substantial time and effort training you up. So that's part of the package, and it's part of what they need to consider. And it may be part of the reason why the salary is not quite at the level you're seeking. Do benchmark similar company salaries at your current experience level. The employer is probably doing the same thing. And just be careful about sort of coming in too strong. I have nothing opposed to an individual asking for more after they receive an initial offer, but it depends on where they fall. Are they asking for 30 or 40%, or is it a 10% jump? In this market, the 10% is not unusual. And to be honest, it's not, for us, it's more an issue of equity than it is of the money itself. If it's a great candidate, most consulting firms are willing to bend a little bit to make it work. Let's see what we have next. Is there another slide? And just a few parting thoughts. Johns Hopkins, I consider to be one of a handful of elite schools in the area of public health. If not the best, it's right up there in the top 3. So you want to make sure that your degree from Hopkins is an asset during your interview process and never a liability. So you do that by just conveying a firm grasp of what you've learned and good discipline and habits and the way you communicate. It is true that in the business world, there is less of a focus on some of the public health topics you may have studied at Hopkins. So if you've done public health in developing countries, there may be less of that activity in a medical product space. Nonetheless, though, the skills you applied, the epidemiology you studied, the writing that you did will still be relevant and transferable. At the end of the day, though, firms like ours, at least, are looking for resilience, hard work, attention to detail, and people who are willing to get their hands dirty and learn new things. So you want to make sure that you don't come across in the interview process as feeling entitled, for example, with a master's degree, to be a senior associate upon entry, which is typically a PhD level role, just because you went to Hopkins. That's probably not going to work. And at the end of the day, there are big differences between an academic environment and an environment like ours. Some people thrive on the highly structured world of academia and then come to the business world and struggle because it's less structured. They have to figure out for themselves how to add value and what to do every day. So it doesn't guarantee necessarily all the attributes we need to see. It's a strong indicator and it's very encouraging. And for sure, we love to see Hopkins graduates in the application pool, but we don't assume that they're perfect until we've gone through the hiring process. Flexibility, teamwork, and willingness to learn are really critical. Commitment to the success of our team our company and our clients. And remember the skills that I started with in the very beginning. No one is 100% perfect at all of them. Presentation skills and writing and analytics. Some people are strong at some and others. The same is true for me. So the Hopkins degree by itself doesn't guarantee all of that. It's really something we need to see through the hiring process. But for sure, if I have an applicant with a Hopkins degree and one from a school that is less known in public health, I'm going to place a priority on the Hopkins degree, at least to offer an interview. There's no doubt. That is all the content I have. I know I moved very quickly. Caroline, should we pause for any questions?
Sorry, that took me a moment to get out of full screen. Yes, so I know that you had a wrap-up time of around 10:45, Stefan, so I want to be respectful of that. But we could probably take a question or two. Amir, I see that your hand is up. You should have the ability to unmute yourself.
Good morning. Your mic is off.
No, you can't unmute yourself. There we go. I think somebody had turned it off. Amir,
Oh, yeah.
okay,
Yeah,
there
good.
we go.
Thank you so much. My question was, sometimes they ask us for a specific skill, like what level of skill you have, like baseline, intermediate, or the advanced. So in my opinion, and what you said in that context, so we can never be specialist or advanced in that. So what should be your answer in that situation?
That's interesting. We would never ask that question, because if you ask people if they think they're a good writer, everyone thinks they're a good writer. To us, it's not a productive question. Well, try to be honest in the scheme of things. Let's say it's in the area of quantitative analysis and you were a math major in undergrad and you've done extremely well at your Hopkins course, like statistics and epi. I think you could say you're an advanced, but if it's something among other things that you've done, but not particularly deep, then try not to overrate yourself. It's sort of being accurate, but not overly exaggerating your competence is important. And I think the rest of what you've done and your record and your Hopkins degree will speak for themselves. I mean, that example I gave of an ethical issue in the industry, there's a culture in startup biotech to fake it until you make it. And with medical products, that's a very bad combination because it means that you're not telling the truth about the value of your products and so forth. So in our discipline, we want people who are honest, but obviously you're selling your capabilities. We expect you to show a positive light on what you've done. Just don't overdo it, is my advice.
Thank you.
Great, so I'm going to combine a couple of questions that are in the chat here. So first asking, do consulting positions require extra certifications outside of their typical degree that they're getting here at Hopkins? And how quickly are consultants able to grow within your organization?
Sure, I'll answer the first one first. The certification stuff is specific to each discipline. There actually is a certification that means a ton in my space, and it has to do with this arcane space called CPT coding, current procedural terminology. And there's a certification that is offered by the American Medical Association, I think, or one of the societies on CPT expertise. If I saw someone with that certification, I would try to grab them. It's a very specialized niche among all the things we do. It's very hard to come by. In terms of consultants being able to grow within the company, usually associates in our company are master's level. Our philosophy is basically we want people who are aggressive learners and ambitious, who want to move up quickly. Some of the very best of them the rock stars have moved up in 1 year's time to senior associate. A more typical time frame of someone who is successful would be 2 years. And that threshold to cross from associate to senior associate depends on your ability to be client facing, to be able to speak to a client and manage them and convey strong answers, you know, a mature response basically to the dynamic with the customer. Research associates typically are very strong undergrads who have some healthcare exposure. A couple of those have moved up in just 1 year to an associate level. We usually like to see a graduate degree for associate level, and a lot of firms insist upon it, and they don't allow mobility from the RA position to the associate. We're not like that. We offer greater flexibility. When talking about negotiating salaries, we talked about how professional full-time experience is important. Does the experience have to be consulting experience? No, it does not. We realize that we prefer consulting experience because the dynamics are likely to be the same or similar in many consulting disciplines to ours. But if you worked in a manufacturer, that would be fantastic. There's a school up here called Northeastern, which you may have heard of, and they have an amazing internship program where they place people in actual medical device companies. And their resumes are pretty impressive because they actually understand what we do. One of the problems we have as a hiring consulting firm is that people only vaguely understand what we do at the point of application. You know, it's just a very fuzzy concept to them. And the risk is that once they're hired, they'll say, oh, this isn't for me, or this doesn't interest me. So we like to see some level of understanding of it. And if someone has worked in the industry that we serve, that's a definite plus. But yes, if full-time experience is important, and it may cause us to offer a higher level salary. How important is an MBA when it comes to role progression within healthcare, biopharma consulting firm? MBAs are very common in the industry. And we've had, how many? 3 MBAs, maybe 4 in our team over the various years. The ones who were strong writers and analysts did great. They tended to be good at focusing on, not surprisingly, the financial aspects of the analysis that we do. I did find that a couple of them were a little bit overly transactional in terms of the projects, sort of getting them done and off the plate. But yes, it could be an asset. I would put an MBA and a JD, a law degree, at sort of an equal level in terms of the preparation it brings for our type of work. You would also want to see those some exposure to healthcare, not just the degree. And it looks like one of you went to Northeastern. Congratulations, great school. How can one apply for an associate position at your company? Generally speaking, when looking for consulting position in LinkedIn, the first place to check. So on this one, I'm not really a source of wisdom in that we have looked all over for different ways to advertise. LinkedIn in this most recent round was by far more successful. Indeed, which is another service that we've used, produces a ton of noise of resumes that are not well suited. And almost automatically, people who have not customized their resume or their letter for our position specifically. So it winds up being a kind of a poor use of energy. This time, LinkedIn was a vastly more successful venue for us. How can one apply for an associate position in our company? You can send me an email to inquiries@hullassociates.com with your resume and a cover letter. I would look up our position that's posted on LinkedIn. It's still there. We still have 1 position open at this time, and we plan to be hiring further in the summer. What kind of bonuses does our company give? I worked in healthcare and have never asked about bonuses in the different jobs I've worked. Well, healthcare generally means different things. If you're working at a hospital, you may not get any bonus, or the bonus may be 3%. We want to link incentives from performance strongly to performance in our company. And so it's not very common, but we offer a pretty large bonus, 15% of base salary, up to 15%. And that depends 50% on company performance and 50% on individual performance. So if the company makes its target, then we do an analysis of performance. on a scale of 1 to 100, and that derives the bonus for the individual. We have never had a year in 15 years where we didn't pay any bonus. And our company's been growing at 20% a year. So it's all been good. In your experience, would a candidate who has medical publications be a good indicator to access editing and writing? Yes, for sure. But remember that in the medical publication cycle and in peer review, there's many different hands that touch the article who may clean it up. But if somebody, let's say they were, the fourth author and did all the writing in support of their professor, that's a pretty good indicator. There's still going to be a writing test, a live writing test. Like we need to see with 100% certainty this person can stand on their own when it comes to writing. How is performance measured for your consultants? We have a scale of 1 to 100. We also have bonus points that people bring in new business, and we assign certain point values to each attribute on the list. There are things like organization, timeliness of deliverables, understanding of health policy. We also have an exam for one-year associates of core knowledge, and we like to see a score on that of 90 or above. There's another question about paying attention to certain certifications. Again, in our space, there's only one cert that I think is valuable necessarily, which is the CPT coding one that I can think of. There's a regulatory affairs certification. We're not an RA firm though, so it's really outside of our space. That question will vary depending on the specific consulting opportunity you're looking at. Considering with summer internships to most larger firms is mostly for MBA students, how can one with another advanced degree get a foot in the door? Preferably in terms of student on visa. Not all firms offer summer internships. We're actually looking at that for this summer, and we're speaking with Harvard as well about that. If there's anyone on this list who'd like to be a summer intern, let us know. That could be possible. It, of course, will be in our Boston area office. This part about the visa is also important. Understand that if you're coming in the door with a visa, you're creating uncertainty and workload on the employer. On the other hand, I have seen some visa applicants who seemed extremely hardworking, which are some of the key things we're looking for. So just be aware that you're asking for something on the employer side that creates workload for them, and be sensitive to that. Remember that the key criteria that I mentioned in the beginning is commitment and focus and basically a desire to succeed in the new role. So even if you have a visa application to a position, you still have the potential of thriving if you demonstrate those things to the employer. Next question. You mentioned having a skills test as part of the interview process. Is case interview common or usually required for healthcare consultant positions? Yeah, so my deputy was a McKinsey consultant at one point, and he loves doing case scenario questions during the verbal process. I don't usually do those. It's something he chooses to do. I actually kind of discourage it. What I care most about are analytic skills in writing, not whether you can count the number of windows in a building. But there is some of that in the management consulting firms for sure. Oops, we're coming up on the hour. Thank you, Caroline. I think I'm okay. I can take one more question if anyone else has one.
Yeah, I think we have time for about one more.
Okay, we can wrap up.
And it looks like, I don't want to mispronounce your name, Taiwo. I think you have your hand raised if you'd like to unmute yourself.
Sorry, that was a mistake.
Oh,
I
okay,
have a question.
not a
Yeah,
problem.
thank you.
Okay,
Any other questions for Stefan?
and it looks like one of your one of your folks is interested in a summer internship. Send me an email at inquiries@hullassociates.com and we'll see what we can do.
Okay, fantastic. Well, we want to thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to speak with us today, and to give your insights on not only just healthcare consulting, but also the interview process, and it sounds like some of the negotiation process as well. So thank you all very much for attending today. I want to remind you that we have another presentation at noon, which is going to be focused on acing the virtual interview. So as we're all in this, remote space kind of indefinitely, how can you make yourself stand out in the virtual interview process? So thanks again, Stefan, and thank you all. Looking forward to seeing you later today.
Of course, my pleasure. I'm typing my email in this string. If people want to send me a note with resumes and whatnot, we can talk.
Excellent, great. And this session was recorded, so we'll send that out. So if anybody, wants to go back and look at some of the information you presented, they'll have the ability to do that.
Fantastic. Great to
All
speak
right.
with you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.